Part 9. Lakeside Goodbye. The chipped porcelain jester, affixed to the rearview mirror, wasn't a mocking welcome anymore, but a knowing farewell. Its painted grin felt less like amusement than the quiet pressure of a hand on your shoulder after bad news. It acknowledged not defeat, but the pornousness of certainty. We drove away from the lakeside retreat, the garage swallowing the SUV, its concrete teeth grinding shut on the anxieties it had birthed. The lake, vast and the color of a fading plum under a sky bruised with approaching storm, held reflections warped by ripples, our faces elongated, ghosted with shades of quiet reckoning. Leo had already retreated into his VR world, fingers flying across the controller as if severing a nerve connecting him to the solid world. He hadn't glanced at the water. Its surface held nothing he hadn't already constructed with more vibrant fidelity. Eleanor sat rigid beside Arthur, her gaze fixed on the passing trees, maples bleeding crimson and gold. The arguments of yesterday hadn't erupted in shouting matches, but had settled into a cold, efficient dismantling of shared assumptions. She'd begun quietly researching executive coaching certifications during the drive, her jaw tightening with each scroll through LinkedIn profiles. Not just any coaching. She was drawn to programs focused on somatic intelligence, learning to lead from the body, not in spite of it. A subtle shift from partnership track lawyer to something more pliable. A career that wouldn't demand she sculpt herself into a perfect triangle within a rigid square, but allow for slow, organic growth, like ivy claiming a stone wall. She traced the seam of her tailored jacket with her thumb, feeling suddenly constrained by its precision. It was a small rebellion, almost invisible against the backdrop of our collective fatigue, yet it pulsed with a quiet power, a tightening in her chest that felt less like anxiety and more like burgeoning possibility. Grandma Vivian, surprisingly subdued, stared out the window, murmuring about the land remembering. She'd said it wasn't about ghosts exactly, but about choices resonating through time, a sort of echo woven into the very soil. The loggers who'd mocked the spirit hadn't feared its power as much as its recognition of their arrogance. They'd wanted dominion over the forest without offering respect, and the spirit simply reminded them that every taking required a giving, every felling a seed. Vivian believed spirits craved an audience for all forgotten choices, a comfort in knowing their sacrifices weren't entirely lost to the churning currents of time, that even indifference left its mark. Arthur found himself scanning the landscape for one last glimpse of that shadowy figure. Had it been real, or merely a projection of our collective unease? It didn't matter anymore. Or perhaps it mattered more than ever precisely because it might have been both. The figure was as in the garage. It was of it, an embodiment of all the stored-up regrets and unacknowledged anxieties that had been simmering beneath our carefully constructed lives. A physical manifestation of all he'd let slip away. His stalled novel, his strained relationship with his brother, his fear of truly embracing Clara's unconventional art. He touched his hand to Clara's head. She was sketching in her notebook again, filling page after page with gestures, some laughing wildly, others weeping silently, each one representing a facet of our family's complicated history. Miniature portraits of acceptance and despair rendered in charcoal and ink. The seventh jester card had appeared stuck to the rearview mirror just before we left, a jester looking directly at us, with eyes that held both amusement and pity, a benevolent smirk acknowledging our beautifully flawed attempts at control. It felt less like an accusation than an invitation to laugh at ourselves, at our attempts to impose order on inherent chaos, to believe we could truly navigate life without stumbling. The final painting Clara completed captured this perfectly. The entire landscape was populated with jesters, trees with jesters' faces peering from behind leaves, waves cresting into jester caps, even the sun itself wearing a floppy hat and bells, casting dancing shadows across everything. They represented all past and present decisions, all forks in the road we'd navigated or stumbled upon. All roads not taken shimmering like phantom paths in the periphery of our vision, each choice echoing through time like ripples expanding across a still pond. Leo finally surfaced from his VR cocoon long enough to ask if we were almost there. Almost where? Arthur wanted to ask. Back to normal? Back to pretending? He was thinking about Kierkegaard's Abraham, that terrifying leap of faith, and how often he himself preferred comfortable certainty to uncomfortable truth. But he simply nodded and said yes. The silence that followed wasn't hostile this time. It was reflective, a weighted pause between one act and another, punctuated by the hum of tires on asphalt. Back home now, things had shifted subtly. Eleanor started making tentative inquiries about coaching programs during her lunch breaks. Leo spent slightly less time plugged in each day, occasionally surfacing from VR with a faraway look in his eyes as if processing something beyond pixels. Clara continued painting gestures until her fingers were stained with ink and color. Even Arthur found himself less inclined towards grand philosophical pronouncements and more attuned to the small nuances of daily life. The way sunlight slanted across Clara's sketchbook, the particular cadence of Vivian's voice when she told stories. Tonight, at dinner, fried chicken, Clara's favorite, felt different than usual. It wasn't necessarily better, just aware, as if we were all actors on a stage suddenly conscious of an audience. We weren't quite holding our breath anymore, but we were listening more closely, watching each other with a newfound tenderness. Then Arthur discovered it, tucked inside his favorite copy of Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. Another jester card, this one depicting Arthur himself being gently mocked by a smaller jester wearing his tweed jacket and spectacles. It wasn't unkind mockery, more like affectionate ribbing. The little jester tugging at his lapel as if asking, "And what profound thought occupies you now?" And finally, as he prepared for bed, an 11th card drifted down from under his pillow. Jesters dancing, a swirling kaleidoscope of painted faces, celebrating absurdity after all. Their bells tinkling softly in the darkness. The lake hadn't solved anything, hadn't banished our demons, but it had shown us that maybe, just maybe, those demons weren't so frightening after all. They were simply echoes, the jester's echo of choices made, choices regretted, choices still to come. Evidence not just that we chose, but how we chose, driven by fear or love or simple inertia. And in embracing them, in acknowledging their playful cruelty, we might just find room for a little grace within our beautifully imperfect lives. Maybe acceptance isn't about stillness, but about learning to dance with your shadows, letting them lead for a while.